Welcome back to a covert narcissist's world. I've never seen someone out here before. And the trick of a covert narcissist is that they have the qualities of a narcissist within them, but they keep them under wraps. They are covert about them, and in fact will even display that they dislike themselves. Many narcissists and narcissistic tendencies, narcissistic people, they themselves can keep their own narcissism so covert that they may not even see anymore their own tactics and tendencies, their own way of seeing and moving and being in the world. It wouldn't be uncommon for a covert narcissist that you may be in a relationship with to act like you don't care for their needs, you don't hear them. They'll definitely try and play that card. So what does covert narcissism feel like when you're in a relationship with somebody? It's definitely one of the hardest things to ever try and explain to another person. In fact, it can be a hard thing to explain to yourself. There are a lot of tiny, small things day to day that being with a covert narcissist reveals in your life that makes it so draining and painful and just confusing and awful. And, you find yourself in the circular arguments and it's just kind of never ending. Since you are more than likely a very empathetic person to begin with, otherwise, maybe we wouldn't be with these people because we seem to attract each other in some ways. The empathy in that case can be so overwhelming. It's the smallest things that wouldn't make a person feel inadequate. It's the smallest things that the average person wouldn't focus on for more than a minute in a conversation. But it's these small things that shouldn't matter. Small requests, small conversations, small decisions that shouldn't matter. These small things that would not make an average person feel inadequate, that start making you feel inadequate day in and day out. For example, even something as simple as choosing what we were going to eat that night for dinner could be a monumental task. It was only ever the two of us eating. And I made it, quite clear to him in conversations before that we don't have to eat like a proper dinner together every night. And he was definitely flexible within that. It's not like he was trying to cook up a roast every night or anything like that. I mean, we definitely had plenty of simple dinners, but there was always an element of stress around eating and dinners with him that I've never experienced before in another relationship. Sometimes it would be even a comment like, well, we have to eat, we have to eat dinner and you have to eat dinner. Sometimes I would say I wasn't hungry and he would basically tell me, well, you have to eat, let me feed you. You have to eat. And yeah, most of the times I actually enjoyed that food and said afterwards, like, oh, that was good. I'm glad I ate that. But my boundary for what I wanted and desired, even in these small little things, was just never, ever, ever, ever respected. Even something as simple as walking down the street together, which, you know, he would never, ever let me walk on the outside, only on the inside. And this seems very courteous and gentlemanly, you know, like he's protecting me even, my protector. But it really was like an exaggerated effect. Like, you know, some of these things, whether they were good or bad, negative or positive, they always seem to have an exaggerated effect to them. And yet they were just regular daily things. Like, I don't need, you know, I just don't need a partner that's always going to constantly be right here and never let me walk on the outside street. If I did end up on the outside of him on the street, you know, he'd let it go for a minute or two, but then he'd find a way to scoot me back in and tell me that, you know, he just didn't feel comfortable or safe with me out there. As if I can't manage my own body. And yet it seems very, you know, caring and loving. And so who would get upset or angry at that? I was never upset or angry at that. But it's these small things every single day that just whittle away at your own personhood, because they're done in a covert way. They're done by a person who doesn't have good intentions about any of it. It's always a power dynamic with them in some way or another, even if they're trying to seem, you know, courteous and good. And that's not to take all of the good that they do away from them, which I think speaks to the whole narcissism spectrum, and that, you know, somebody who's very narcissistic to the point that we're able to feel very uncomfortable in a relationship with them and start to identify these things, they're going to be very narcissistic as far as that spectrum is concerned, right? Well, they're going to have good days, just like no evil, you know, it's not all evil all the time. It's not one grandiose abuse. It's these little things day after day that add up. And it's confusing because it's, again, not always done in an outright mean way. Yes, like in my particular situation with my partner, he would have the outbursts and the rage attacks occasionally, but it wasn't day to day. It wasn't all of the time. And he was like able to identify those things. And that's what he saw as, you know, the bad stuff, the abuse, although he really hated when I used that word. But those are the things that he would be willing to say, like, oh yes, like that's not good and I need to work on that. And he would blame it on the alcohol, for example. But the rest of it, no, he would never see any of this, anything that I'm saying. And he would only see the good in himself. And of course, I only saw that too. But this is extremely important to exemplify the smallest things every single day that would not make an average person feel inadequate. This is what happens with a covert narcissist. You end up encountering a million things day in and day out that just end up making you feel completely no good, completely useless, completely inadequate. Not to mention the times where you're outright humiliated and ridiculed, and in an underhanded, under the table way, a lot of times. And when this happens over and over again, and you hear it enough, you begin to believe it, and you kind of get sucked into their own reality. And when I say you begin to believe it, you know, it's very easy to reject that, because a lot of us will also say, you know, we knew it was not okay and we didn't believe it at the same time. And that's kind of the point, is that this is slow and insidious, and that it's happening at the same time that you're having good days with this person too, and you're seeing some good out of them. Again, because this is not the all evil all the time, there is that little bit of the spectrum. They're not dipping down into the normal range or even the, you know, codependent range, but they're definitely at times, you know, coming down from the 10 on the extreme narcissistic scale to maybe a 9 and an 8, where they're like having a kind gesture in XYZ or having a genuine moment. And this is part of what keeps us so hooked and so confused. Again, because it's not just all abuse, all evil all the time. And especially when there's not physical, or maybe there's very little physical. Like for me, the physical abuse only happens the one time to me, to my person, to my body. Although I saw him physical in other, instances. But anyway, to me, it was that one time in July. And because there were circumstances, like, I excused it right away in terms of circumstances of his behavior and the environment, whatever, that were going on, that I figured, in my head, I thought, no, it's not okay. And no, I know what happened to me, and I need him to acknowledge that. But I also didn't think that it was like something that was going to happen frequently with him, or, but in December, I did see that he was capable of going there again, because that last time that I saw him, when he had my phone, he was also pulling on my jacket, and I felt the energy so ramped up that I felt like it was about to get physical. I was kind of confused at times too about how John really saw himself, because he would talk about how honest he was, what an honest person he was. And he would equate his honesty at times, it seemed, with his abrasiveness and meanness, and just telling it as it is, so to speak, telling the truth of things. And yet, he was always right. Like, his truth was always right, So he would basically say, well, I'm just a really honest person. And some people can't handle that. I'm just a really honest person. And so, I'm gonna be straight with you, and I'm gonna tell it like it is. And that would, like, excuse away his meanness to an extent. He would talk about how honest he is, and oftentimes, like I've said this before in previous videos, he would preface his statements by saying, to be honest, ... to be honest, ... or to tell you the truth. But a lot of times it was to be honest, ... And then sometimes he would say, like, oh, and I know sometimes I can be, like, really, really mean. Like, I heard him say that a couple times. Again, as if equating his radical honesty was also his approval and necessity for his meanness at times. And then he would follow it by saying something like, and I know you're sensitive. And the way that the word sensitive was used with me was in a roundabout way. Like, he knew that I took my sensitivity seriously, so to speak, in terms of, like, that I felt like my sensitivity was a positive thing. I feel like my sensitivity is a positive thing. And I feel like I've, cultivated over the years and learned about it so that it doesn't control me. And so I wasn't just, like, outright told. Like, he could tell I was, beyond that point with the understanding of sensitivity. He didn't just outright tell me, like, oh, you're too sensitive. Oh, you're being too sensitive. I think he knew that wouldn't work with me. But what he would do, this is even more strategic and insidious, is he would, almost very gently and kindly say to me, like, about how mean he was, and his honesty, and that he knows he can be mean. He knows how sensitive I am. I know you're sensitive. And I have to be mindful of that because you're so sensitive. And that's okay. You're just such a sensitive lamb. And I love that about you. So I mean, but I don't mean it. But I don't not mean to mean it. I need to flutter those eyelashes. Flutter those eyelashes at me. Yeah. That was the message. So I would feel like, yeah, he's right. I am sensitive, and he didn't, like, accuse me of my sensitivity. He acknowledged my sensitivity, actually. And he acknowledged it in a way that kind of made me feel good. I don't know. It made me feel bad too. I don't know. But I know it wasn't, I know it wasn't a positive thing. Okay. And then, one time, I witnessed him at his house where, well, not his house, but his landlord's house where he lived. I was over there. We're making dinner. The other roommate comes home who hadn't lived there for too long. Another older gentleman. Not too old, just, guy in his late 30s or something. Maybe early 40s. And all of a sudden, John's like stomping out of the kitchen, into the bedroom to get something, and then stomping back into the kitchen. And, clearly and obviously angry energy. Again, a complete, overreaction to whatever's going on. I mean, a person walked into the room and we're making dinner, and now he's slapping patties down on the frying pan. I mean, it was really a harsh energy all of a sudden, and I was sitting there like, whoa, what's going on? Everybody was clearly uncomfortable. The landlord of the house, the guy who this energy was directed at, and myself. This continued, this huffiness, for 10 minutes. At one point, John says something like, I don't appreciate the music. Maybe it was something about music, he said. I think he was blaming the roommate for having music on late or something like that. Anyway, way big reaction, too big. And he follows it with, and I'm the most considerate person that you'll ever meet. I'm the most considerate person that you'll ever meet. I'm so considerate. I'm so generous and kind and considerate. And yeah. There was more than that, but I remember that line in particular. I'm the most considerate person you'll ever meet. Yeah, and then we went and had dinner. And that was as if nothing happened. And I remember going back out into the kitchen at one point, just I was like, really sorry guys. Sorry about his behavior there. I see how distorted his view of himself is, and that he sees the world through this distorted trauma lens that he carries with him, from his own childhood, even though he would never let on to me really how bad it was. But, because victims tend to be more empathetic and hopeful individuals. I mean, we see the world and these people are the people in our lives, the covert narcissists in our lives, through the eyes of good, through the eyes of hope, through the eyes of love, loving them so much. I mean, it's crazy. I've never loved anybody as much as I love John. I really felt like I could love him enough that he would feel that and feel safe, and he would feel safe being vulnerable himself. I felt like my love in that sense would be enough, especially over time. So you see them through the eyes of good, of hope, of this love, of this intense love, and wanting to help them more than anybody else, in your life, including yourself. I mean, I wanted to help him so intensely. It was crazy. I spent good portions of my day, each day, just thinking about him, thinking about different, nutrients and supplements that would help him with his brain chemistry, I really felt like we could balance enough of this out of him and all of these things, you know. But I always gave him the benefit of the doubt that he saw me through these same lenses. But that's just not true. It's just not true of them. They can't. So they see the world through this distorted lens of manipulation and cruelty and injustice, and that the world and you are treating them poorly and out to get them. And even though they love you and they say they love you and they want to love you, you know, it's too easy for them to see you as somebody who is also manipulative and out to get them. You must have an agenda too. And this is just the way that they operate in the world, the way they move through the world. And so you are also put into that same perspective and that lens. They don't have any way of separating it. So even though it makes complete logical sense to us because we have conversations with them every once in a while where it seems like they see the light bulb's on, and we're going to be okay. If we could just fix these parts, you know, the rest is so good, we're going to be okay. You just seem to never get there, right? And you end up in those circular conversations over and over again. So as I said, I can see how distorted his own view of himself is. And this is part of that false self that they carry. So for my partner, you know, his false self, he sees himself as extremely kind and generous and loving and, you know, a good Samaritan, you know, a good citizen of the world. And the false self that he has to, you know, like the rest of covert narcissists, hold it up so strongly, so firmly, with so much effort. It takes so much effort to maintain it, that it's exhausting. It exhausts him, but not in the same way that we are exhausted by them to our core, because they suck our life energy from us. They are stealers of life energy, which is disgusting. Anyway, I've never felt that before. I was like, whoa, someone just completely stole my life force. And they don't even see that, and then they're going to point the finger at you. Anyway, do not sidetrack. Right, so because he sees himself in this light, because his false self is so, you know, upheld by his quote-unquote actions in everyday life, you know, he has a reason and an excuse for every one of his behaviors, because truly he's a good person, right? And he would say weird things all the time, like things that I would never say, and I don't hear other people say, you know, as if he's trying to prove something to himself or justify something to others. He would say things like, you know, well, I really am a good person. I am a good person. Or he would say it to me like, oh, well, you really are a good person. Sometimes he would say that to me after like a discard or something. Or he would say, you know, I do miss you. I do love you. You know how many times I heard that? I do miss you. You know, I do love you. It was like, what? You do? You had to think about that? Or, you know, you didn't miss me at all, but, or you don't miss people in general, but maybe you miss me a little bit. I don't know, it was really strange. Of like I missed him like crazy. Of course I missed him. I missed him like crazy. I thought about him all the time, you know, finally getting to the point where I'm not now. But he would say those things to me, and it always felt very ingenuine. Okay. Oh, and then I came across a couple of voicemails. So I'm going to play a couple of them for you because they were both right after one was a discard, and the other one was after the abuse, the physical abuse that happened, and thus, you know, basically also a discard. So I'll play both of those for you. It's interesting to hear how calm he sounds.
Hey, I'm gonna bring your stuff to your car tomorrow. I'm just gonna drop it outside of Natural Grocers, and I'll text you when it's there before I get on the train to Albuquerque. Have a good night. Morgan, can you tell Ryan I'm so sorry about breaking things that I broke. If the cops come here, we'll both go to jail because you seriously you scratched my face. But yeah, I hope you guys are okay.